Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dialogue with Prof. Mandirukuni. My name is Kevin Kumire, and I will be your moderator for tonight. For the past couple of weeks, we have been focusing on the detraumatization, decolonization of the African mind. Tonight's session is the grand finale. As we close off the series, we're doing things differently tonight. Joining Prof will be a panel of 6 individuals who have joined us. Each individual will present for 7 minutes. After that, each panelist will give a 7-minute presentation. Prof. Mandi will share his final thoughts on the series. Then we'll open up the floor for 40 minutes for contributions and questions. We will close off the session at 7:30, and the conversation will migrate to our WhatsApp and Telegram groups, where Prof will share his final thoughts for the night. This session will also be available for viewing after 24 hours on our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof. Mandi Rukuni. Please subscribe to always receive content, and on our Facebook page, Dialogue with Prof. Mandi Rukuni. The session rules will be, please keep your microphone muted at all times. Please use the hand reaction button if you wish to ask or contribute. Questions and contributions can be shared with the administrator or the moderator via direct messaging. Not all questions will be responded to, but will be included in a media pack, which will later be shared on our social media platforms. So I will now introduce our panel for tonight. First, we have Jesmuse Sasinda. Jesmunde is a Mozambican journalist and a publisher. He co-founded Ethel Publishing, a publishing house and media company focused on African narratives. He studied philosophy and with expertise in African philosophy and culture. Welcome, Jesmuse. Our second panel member will be Watanai Gadwe. Watanai Gadwe is a mother of 2, an adult, an author, an activist, and an executive coach, a mentor and a firm believer in the power of economic empowerment. Watanai was born in Zimbabwe, where she did her primary school education and did her undergrad and postgrad degrees in the United States. Professionally, Watanai is an economist who studied finance and community economic development. She's worked in the development space with non-governmental organizations and is currently working in the United Nations systems. Our third panel member will be Mazita Kubwalo. Mazita is a human rights advocate, a humanitarian worker with experience working with local and international civil society organizations. She is especially passionate about women's rights, promotion and children protection. She studied social sciences, psychology and international relations, and international human rights and humanitarian law in the contemporary world. Our fourth panel member is Caroline Masunda. Caroline is a research consultant with experience in quantitative and qualitative research, experience in human-centered design research and facilitation. She studied engineering at Linux security and HCD research. Our fifth member is Jonathan Muringani. Jonathan is an African innovation scholar and Zimbabwe national researching across economic geography, innovation studies and political science. He holds a PhD from the University of Stavanger, Norway, and a master's degree from the University of Wits in Johannesburg. Besides his academic interests, Jonathan has worked within the telecom industry, energy and consulting industries. Our sixth member is Watanai Gadwe. He is a researcher in policy and governance with experiences working with Barefoot Education Africa Trust for the past 4 years. He's passionate about the African society, having strong institutions and good governance to see the continent, in order to see the continent prosper and thrive as Africa, as one Africa. I would like to welcome the panel for tonight, and we'll hand over the for a few minutes so Prof can give us an insight on the topic, and then our presenters, our panel will present for 7 minutes each, one after the other, and we'll open up the group for discussions. Thank you. Over to you, Prof.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin, and welcome to our panelists. As a matter of fact, all I'm going to say is welcome to you all, and I'm not going to make any additional remarks because I really think that it's your night tonight to tell us what has really become clearer to you on this de-traumatization, decolonization of the mind. What are the things that really are clearest in terms of what actions we need to take individually, at national level, as a continent, and so on. Thank you so much. So over to you, Kevin, to continue with the panel.
Thank you very much, Prof. So our first panel member will be Jess. Jess from Mozambique will be presenting. Over to you, Jess. Jess, can you hear us?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. And you?
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, everybody, for letting me be part of this final panel of the series Decolonize and Detraumatize African Mind. It's been a great pleasure and honor to me to be part of this group, Dialogue with Prof. Mandevokuni, and I have been following the Zoom sessions every week. And as Franz Fanon said, colonialism was a process of suffocation, and it has suffocated everything related to us as Africans. After 40, 50, or 60 years of African independence, the colonial system is still there, operating in different manner. And this system is always trying to convince us that there is no another way of living without westernize our minds, westernize our bodies, production process, religion, cosmology, etc., etc. I propose to share with the audience today what I left with after following these sessions on decolonization and detraumatization of African minds. So following these sessions made me start thinking about what we can do as Africans to get out of this condition of colonizing. And I realized that the unique way of strangulating colonialism is through culture. Culture is one of the complex words that exist in any language. Probably this is why Samora Machel has defined culture poetically, calling it as the sun that never goes down. Yes, if we put our culture behind, we are not allowing the sun that never goes down to shine. By culture, I mean a set of traditions, its values, creations, its knowledge, and wisdom that allow the existence of human beings. So we do it through education, or education is the way to call culture for us. The colonial system truthfully it to perpetuate its power. If we want a total decolonization, we need to, how I can call it, we need to cut the evil by the roots. And the way of doing that is giving back the culture for its own. The decolonization process starts by the culture. That's the main idea, what I left with after following these dialogues. And before ending my intervention, I would like to share with you some insights of what we are doing to decolonize African minds. So the moderator introduced me as a publisher. In 2016, me and my friend Alex co-founded a publishing house focused on African narratives. The idea of founding the publishing house came after a long day of search of African books in bookstores in Maputo. At the time, we were running a festival in the north of the country, and we wanted to offer African books for students in a public secondary school. Our initial idea was to hand out 10 books by 10 authors from 10 African countries. We scored all the bookstores in Maputo, we scored bookstores in Lisbon, and we didn't find 10 books in Portuguese by 10 authors from 10 African countries. After this episode, we decided to create a publishing house focused on African literature and philosophy. And today, after 4 years operating in the market, we translated from English, French, and Kiswahili into Portuguese about 10 books by authors such as Gadwe Pyongo, Aminata Sofao, and Luole Soyinka. I think I have some, yes, Luole Soyinka. We translated this book from English to Portuguese to let the book available in the Mozambican market and to allow Mozambican people to read our best exciting writers and thinkers across the continent. So doing that, we are giving our country fellows an opportunity to read African stories from different places of the continent. We are giving them back their own culture. So what's happened? Mozambique is the only Portuguese-speaking country on its neighboring. We are, how I can say, we are in a linguistic island. So translating the most powerful literature, translating the most powerful thoughts, translating the most powerful philosophy, we are trying to get out of this island. It's one way of getting out of this island. We are in an island, in a linguistic island. So we believe that culture, understood as a complex concept which refers to knowledge, wisdom, values, creation, etc., and education as well, is all what we need to decolonize the African mind. So I will stop here and thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Prof. Manjuluku. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Jess, for your presentation. Our next presenter will be Watanai. Watanai, is over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be part of this panel. And I want to talk from the perspective of a mother, an African woman. And one of the issues that I think Africa needs to address is its treatment of women. I don't think, and if I look historically, and if I even look tribally, within the places I come from, women are held in great esteem. When I speak to my brothers, I come from a family of just girls. My father passed away, we were 4 girls, and yet I sit at the table with the men. And yet the Western perspective that we're being sold is that I need to be empowered, I need to be emancipated. I need to have my narratives told by other people, and I tend to disagree. Women have very powerful voices in African culture. We are the shapers of the family. In a polygamous society, it is the women who ensure that the children go to school. It's the women that ensure that the children are fed. And it is the women that ensure that the shaping of the culture is done by the women. So I was very interested to look at this. I've got a diagram up here, which was called Debunking Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And what it explains is that Maslow went to the Blackfoot tribe in the US, and he took their idea of hierarchy of needs and translated it into the Western perspective. And with the Western perspective, after you have gotten rid of all the needs, so once you get your housing sorted out, and then you start to get educated, etc., you get to a point of self-actualization. And self-actualization is meant to be the highest form in a Western hierarchy of needs of a person finding themselves. In the Blackfoot tribe, which I think is very similar to what Africans believe in, Africans believe that you are always part of a community and assign roles based on your place in the community. So within an African structure, I am a daughter, I'm a mother, but even if I never have biological children, I am an aunt to the children of my sisters or brothers. As an aunt, I can play a role as a paternal aunt, which means I represent the interests of my brothers, or a maternal mother, which is I can be the stand-in for my sister if she passes away or things like that. And I am also a niece to various people. So within this circle, I have to practice every single role that any adult practices, whether or not I give birth to biological children, whether or not I get married, whether or not, that is all immaterial. All those roles are assigned to me as Watanai to play, and I am called into a meeting or called into a dialogue within a family based on the role that is necessary at the time. And this is what we are ignoring when we step outside our cultural paradigm and try to emulate or imitate different perspectives. I always look to my children, and there's some things they ask. My children are third culture children. They've been brought up in various global settings, but one of the things that we do not lose, and I've always said to my children, in these four walls, you are Zimbabwean. I don't care what you're talking about out there, but you start off here. When you step out of this home, you're stepping out of this home as a Zimbabwean. You're not stepping out, yes, you're a global citizen, I'm very happy about that, but what does it mean to be a Zimbabwean to you? So once a child has an identity, once a person has an identity, whenever people say to me, but don't you want to take the nationality XYZ? My question is why? I already have a nationality. I already have an identity. So I think the most important part, and let me just clarify that I am not a gender specialist. I am not interested in the terms that you ascribe to feminism or patriarchy or matriarchy. I am talking about, as a person, I need to be the change I want to see. In an African context, in a Zimbabwean context, I have roles I have to play. Whether or not I'm based in Italy, where I am, I will be called by someone to say, Tete, which means paternal aunt, I am getting married, I need to be advised. I will be called by my sister's child, Amai Nini, my mom's not going to be there, can you represent me? My mother will call me and say, my daughter, I need you to do XYZ as per your role as my child. My uncle will do that. So let's start off, instead of really trying to look at the trauma and it can get very overwhelming. Let's look at ourselves and see that within the context of our family, what self-actualization is the fact that I belong to a community. The community respects me and it sees me as Watanai. It doesn't see me as Ruvarashe's mother or Munyoro's mother or whatever. When they call me to do the duties that I need to do, they take away the economist, they take away the whatever, and they say, you are coming to play your role in this community as we see it. So my argument is, we've got to stop listening to the noise that is outside. We have our assigned roles. Let us follow the First Nations perspective, which is, I first self-actualize. I am part of a community actualization, which is how I get to build my community. And once we get that, everybody wins. So I just want to argue that let us play our roles in the way in which we were meant to play them. And let us stop trying to play roles that are assigned to us and then take on the trauma of a role that we don't understand. I think I've reached my 7 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Watanai, for your presentation. Our next panel presenter will be Masunda. Her presentation will be on her thoughts on the series and what she thinks is the way forward for Africa and what she gathered from the series. Over to you, Masunda. Masunda, can you hear us?
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me now?
We can hear you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Masunda Detraumitization. I'm going to be presenting my personal thoughts on the series and also what I've gathered as the way forward for Africa from what we spoke about during the course of the different presentations we had. I feel that this presentation, I feel that this series was very important. It was important in that it challenged us to think differently. It challenged us to consider our Africanness as a strength. And it also encouraged our own rediscovery, one that would help forge a way forward towards a more dignified and proud existence, where we know who we are as opposed to where we're being told who we are. So from the discussions that we've had, I feel that the way forward requires our commitment as a people, where we have a vision that we will communicate and share with all from the grassroots level all the way to the top. We'll need buy-in so that we all speak with one voice and we all move in one direction concerning the matter. There's a need to involve everyone so that our agenda is not seen or perceived as elitist. We will also need a strategy or a roadmap that will guide us on the process going forward. The strategy will include creating networks and networking with other individuals, researchers and academics, organizations who are working and speaking on the same manner, so that there is no duplication of effort and also there's pooling of resources. In the discussions that we've had over the past couple of weeks, one thing that kept coming up was the recognition of the African Union as a critical player that has a role to play in the enhancement of African agency on the world stage. It was continuously reiterated that the African Union has to get to a point where they actually say, when you touch one of us, then you've touched all of us, so that, you know, there is that sense of community all over the world. And there's a need to recognize that, you know, and respond to the various ills that affect us wherever we are. And the other thing that kept coming up was also the need to critically look at the funding that the AU receives and where it is coming from. We have to get to a point where the AU is truly autonomous and independent, and in such a way it will therefore be able to represent us in the way that we need it to represent us. And there was also the issue that was raised in the presentation, Transcending to One Africa by the Prof. He mentioned the 7 AU aspirations for Africa. And he went on to say that the aspirations are perfect, but there is need to reprioritize them. And what he then said was that aspiration number 5, which states that there is need for an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics, should be aspiration number 1. I agree with him, because there's a need to reclaim our cultural identity, our traditional culture. There's a need to redefine ourselves as a people based on this, and there's a need to reassert our distinct identity. And I think my only addition to that would be that a critical aspect of this would be the need to look at religion, that is African traditional religion, because African traditional religion, it speaks to the issue of culture in many ways. It speaks to celebrating our languages. It speaks to celebrating our traditional foods. It speaks to following in the footsteps of our ancestors. It speaks to celebrating our dressing and our beauty. So I think that would be my contribution to the series. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Majita, for that. Our next presenter was supposed to be Caroline, but she's having network issues. So we'll move on to Jonathan. Jonathan will do the presentation, and then we'll come back to Caroline. Jonathan, over to you.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Thank you. I will not introduce myself. I've been introduced. So tonight, I'm going to recap on what the Prof has been going for the series. And I'm going to take the talk of tonight from the angle of Africa's time, institutions, and ideas. So explaining society has always been the interest of some people. So I'll call these people social scientists. So is the interest to explain Africa. However, Africa has been explained by other people. Allow me to call them foreigners. So these people are not Africans. So they've come with their own narratives. You can decide whether it's good or bad. The good thing is that African scholars have also done the same. That's why Prof has come forward with a series to educate us about Africa. So in this story about Africa, one of the least told stories is the story of institutions. Quite often, we hear about institutions from all angles and all quarters of society, but hardly are these things explained. So allow me to unpack this black box called institutions. So some people argue that institutions are rules of the game. So these are the rules that constrain actors or people in a society, but also facilitate how they interact and exchange together. So the challenge we face in some societies is that while these rules are important for all players to play a particular game, some players, unfortunately, they also want to be the rules or even the game. So I'm getting towards something. So some people have said we can look at these institutions as formal. So quite often when you get other visitors from the World Bank and many parts of the world, they tell you that institutions is about how governments operate. Yes, they are very correct, but they are not fully correct. So institutions are about how government operates, and we agree. But also, as the Prophet said over the series, we are now aware that institutions is also about how we behave in our societies, not only government, but the role of the people. So we take in that place the role of culture. So culture is a big thing, but in culture, we then look at things like norms. So what must I do and what must I not do? So these things are taken for granted. But we know that the culture is what leads everything. So this is what the Prophet has emphasized, that if we know our culture, we will become confident of the things that we do, because the rules of the games would be laid before us so that we can build other rules. So if we're going to play in the politics, we're going to play in the economic game, we know that we are doing this based on our culture. So this is one of the things that is hardly talked about. So culture is then taken as a side dish to development. So people will then tell us that, no, we need democracy, we need this, we need that. Yes, they are correct. But without culture and treating culture as a side dish, the menu is never complete. So why is culture important in this perspective? So culture is important in the sense that norms, or the way we behave, they arise out of our everyday interaction. So this is something that comes from the bottom up. It's never coming from a particular place in Washington, or a particular place in Harare, or in Joburg, or in Ethiopia, whether it's the AU, but it's coming from the people. So this is an endogenous process. So that's what we mean, that things are internally driven. So if you're going to have development, it must start with the people. It's never something that will come from outside. So because we tend to view culture as a side dish, and in the cultural side dish, we then tend to view the way people work together, or norms of what is acceptable and not acceptable, as something that is meant for villages. So when we leave the towns, we go to the villages, then we start behaving. So without that, we are naked. But if we take our culture, then we've got the foundation. So if I want to go further, I'll then argue that we have seen a lot of changes in Africa, but much of it has been the story told by foreigners to the African audience, who are the consumers of Western propaganda or Western ideas. But rarely have we seen the story of Africans rising to be told to these people. We're not saying let us not work with other people, but if you've got nothing of your own and you are getting everything from somewhere, then you are not yourself. So I think that's the challenge that we have had, that as much as we've been colonized, we have facilitated the colonization. So in other words, neo-colonialism is something that we have allowed. Having fought the colonialists many years ago, we have allowed to be recolonized because we lack the confidence to stand up and say, this is what we are as a people. But thank God, we have come a long way. We start to realize that Ubuntu plays a major role on the world stage. So we are because of other people. We are because we are. So I am because we are. So it is important, therefore, that if Africa is going to move forward, we have to reassert our cultural confidence. So this is the software that we need to build the present and the future. So we all know that in Zimbabwe, we have the Great Zimbabwe. In Egypt, we have got the pyramids. We go to Mali, the Tumbuka scrolls, and many other things. So these are gifts from the past. So these gifts, they've understood, they've withstood the test of time. So if we take these gifts forward, so the stories that are embedded in these gifts, the stories of love, the stories of trust, the stories of responsibility, and we use them for ourselves, for our children, and our grandchildren, then Africa has got a complete line of sight from the past to the present to the future. But quite often we want to jump just to the future. The present doesn't matter. We see quite often that our governments, our organizations, they are so keen to buy external knowledge. We're not saying that is not important, but rarely do they consider, where can I get an African who can tell me this? Where can I get an African who can challenge this? Where can I get an African who can ask questions about this? Because no one else knows you, or no one else understands your circumstances better than the person who is like you. So today we see the AU making strides. But the challenge is These tries were then being made on foreign software, largely Chinese software. We find it embarrassing that even by its own admission, China admitted that they were spying the AU, so they put their spying equipment in the AU headquarters. It's a matter that was never raised. But that is not the only case. We go to the West, it's a similar treatment. So unless we are able to understand that we have a rich past, we are not a poor people, and we can stand on that rich past, and based on those norms that build us as a society, we can then inform how our political system, how our economic system should function, and also how other systems should interact with external systems. Then we can stand. If Africa is going to demand its food, its place at the table of nations, then it's important that we build on our past, as the prophet said over the years. We build up on our past, become culturally confident, and understand what our institutions mean to us, whether it's about gender, whether it's about roles of leadership, whether it's about everyday conversations and interactions. So these are the software that should then help us to drive the African system. So without these endogenous ideas that come from within, we will never be able to make it. So quite often, I know right now I live in Norway, which is a good thing, but I'm also seeing other things. We should remember that before colonialism, the Westerners took a lot of years to understand Africa, to study Africa, whether they came as evangelists, whether they came as traders. They took almost close to half a millennium, 500 years, just to understand Africa. So they took almost 99% planning and 1% execution to colonize Africa. I think today we have been blessed that many Africans are in the diaspora, and I believe, with all due respect, that these Africans have been studying Western systems. They've been studying Chinese systems. And I hope Africa's time is coming, because building on our original software of our cultural confidence, we'll be able to stand and position Africa so that we demand our place at the table of nations. So we are not saying we want to dominate, but we want to contribute as equal partners, but not as, so we are partners, not as the host. So we don't want the host and right relationship, but we want an equal partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for a very insightful presentation. Our next presenter will be Watanai Gadwe. Watanai, over to you.
Okay. Good evening, fellow panelists and everyone who is listening to me. So I'm going to be giving a summary of how the series has went for me as somebody who has been following and as a fellow African. So this series, first of all, has been a revelation to start with. It has sparked a different thought process in us as the African youth, because there are certain things which we have to understand, which we unpacked during this series of decolonization and detraumatization. We should first understand as Africans that colonization was a perfectly orchestrated idea, which was so powerful. That's why it was successful as a system. As a result, for us to be able to undo its gains and its legacy, we need to create ideas which supersede the prior mental thought process which was used to create the animal we are fighting today. So as Africans, we need to understand that there are certain things which we need to do as people to start with, so that we can wage a meaningful war going forward. And this starts with our cultural heritage, understanding of where we came from and who we are as a people before we start talking about moving forward. Because Africa, as Jonathan said, Africa is a very rich continent with very rich history, which we can see through various things which exist in the Nile, for Great Zimbabwe, South Africa, and all other places where we can find evidence of a civilization which prospered, a civilization which was rich in culture and a way of life. So it is from that point of view that we need to take the values which were used to create those systems back then, that civilization back then, which had the whole world planning against to try and destroy. You cannot destroy something which is smaller than what you are. The whites had to destroy that civilization because they understood and they saw that it had the potential and it was much bigger than the civilization with the head where they came from. So if we don't learn from that type of a civilization, which was that powerful, to start and create our own way forward today, then we are not going anywhere. So in this series, these are some of the things which we have learned, that we need to start from understanding who we are, embody the Africanness which we have. We should be proud of being African. We should be proud of our culture, of our heritage, of where we come from as a people. Then only then can we start to say, now we want to create these ideas, these institutions which function like this, which are informed by African values and African beliefs. Because there is no way in which we can beat the Americans at being American or the British at being British. But there is absolutely no one who can beat you at being yourself. That is one thing I've established over this series. We need to understand that if we as Africans take our culture, take our heritage, embody it as Africans, be proud of it, and confront this world embodying that confidence, then we are unstoppable. Because only then can we start to create meaningful solutions for African problems. We have to get back our place in the world table. In that, we can be able to create something which works. Definitely, we need to rethink everything which we are using at the moment, the institutions, the legal, political governance, the education system even, because it is because of these systems which were created on this DNA of a civilization which is foreign to what we are today, which has been the reason why we are failing to use these same institutions to prosper as a continent. So only when we rethink these institutions, recraft them, making sure we put the Africanness, the African value system and the beliefs in these systems so that they can be able to relate to who we are as a people, as a society, where we are coming from as a continent. Can we use these institutions to prosper as a continent? This is some of the things which I've realized throughout this series, that we need strong Africans, bold Africans. We might not be able to stand up as individuals, because as individuals, we are weak at any point. But as a united African standpoint, as a united people, we can be able to fight for any African being racially abused in England or in wherever parts of the world. We can be able to stand up for ourselves. We can be able to say, if you touch any African in any part of the world, Africa is going to retaliate. And only when we do that, can we be able to stop all these other people from coming and disturbing our civilization and trying to challenge who we are as a people. We need to be united. That's the first thing that we need to do. If we are united, we can be able to stand for each other as a unit. Then going forward, we can be able to be powerful. We can be able to command certain things, certain changes, and we can be able to say, us as Africans, this is what we want. Because I have, over the years, and saw a lot of things in the political space and in other institutions, things like democracy, things like they are taken as if they are the only things which can exist, which work. But democracy for Africa and these institutions have failed for Africa. Why has it failed? It's because these things, these philosophies were created with a mentality of a different civilization to ours. So we need to go back to basics, go back to our principles, find what type of a political system which works for us. Then we implement that and we push that going forward. Only then can our institutions start to make sense to our people and start to contribute to a powerful civilization going forward. Then the way forward for this dialogue is a tool for transformation. Over the series, I've realized this is a powerful dialogue which has to be made known to as many Africans as possible. And it all starts with me and it all starts with you, by sharing and making sure that as much Africans as possible, home and abroad, can be able to be part of this dialogue, contribute different ideas, and make sure that these issues, these topics which this show has been trying to teach us over this series can be spoken about on a continental level. Everyone needs to be part of the solution. As much as we would want to create a way forward, we need as many ideas as possible as Africans so that we can be able to create take the best ideas and move forward with them. Then there were some important issues which rose throughout this series. There were issues such as language, the role of language in redevelopment of the African continent. Language is a very important thing which also needs further interrogation. And there is also an issue of names, of why Africans popularize foreign names in giving their children and various things which they are doing today, instead of taking our ancestral names, which we have to be proud about and give them to perpetuate the culture of the continent. Then there's also the issue of education. Education has to be the starting point in the transformation of the African society. We need to start teaching children from a tender age what it means to be African, what it means to be Zimbabwean, Zambian, Mozambican, South African, what that means, and the heritage, the rich history which comes with that, so that whenever our children grow up, they understand that we come from a very rich history and no one else can come from any other part of the world and try to downplay that. Only then, when our children grow up knowing and embodying that African value system, can we start to command a dominance moving forward in all of the issues which were discussed throughout this series. So this is what I found out in the series. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Watanai, for that. Caroline is having network issues, so I'm not sure she's going to be able to come in now. But thank you very much for all your presentations. I will now hand over the mic to Prof to come in, whilst hopefully Caroline will be able to communicate with us if our network improves.
Oh, thanks so much, Kevin, and thanks to all the panelists. So once again, in the interest of time, Kevin, I think we should give the panelists top priority to get questions and comments from the audience, and then I'll just come in right at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. So please use the hand reaction button if you've got a question or contribution for the panel, and we'll unmute your mic. We have Munya.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, may I have a question? It's like we see a lot of African descendants in the diaspora facing a lot of systematic racism these days, which is happening to first-generation immigrants, to even descendants of slaves in other countries. So to me, it seems as though these children of Africa are still facing the brunt of this trauma, which is similar to the colonial period. So in our native nations, we have a lot of people who want to go to these countries, but now when they get there, they're going to face a lot of police brutality, institutionalization, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? So now some of these Africans have a lot of people depending on them back home. So now, how is it possible for us to unite with this generation of diasporians to ensure that all Africans as a people can contribute to a unified force to develop our native land and also provide support for our Africans out there? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munya. Thank you very much, Munya, for that. Watanai?
Hi, I wanted to address Munya's question. As a person who has lived and brought up children both at home and in the diaspora, one of the things that's very important about joining the diaspora to the home country is that a lot of the children are growing up without even understanding what it means to be Zimbabwean. Because what happens is you get to a country and you have to deal with the day-to-day issues of living and survival. And as an immigrant, the first thing you're trying to do is to fit in. So there's a lot of our children who have been born and brought up in the diaspora who have no linkage whatsoever to any of the mother countries. And even more, if people have married from two tribes or two different African countries, and then you use the medium of conversation as English, the first thing that we need to do is, I go back to Jess's point, that publication and reading African stories is very important. Your children need to understand where they're coming from, why they should be very, very, very proud of being from the countries they are, and start to speak to them in the languages of your mother. The mother tongue is so important because, you know, one of the things, we live in Italy, and sometimes my children and I just want to make an observation in Chizezuru, in Shona, and it just brings it home because nobody else can hear us, hopefully. Sometimes they can, but you know, but it brings it home. And there's certain things you can only say in Chizezuru. You know, there's certain expressions, hejo, mawan, all these sort of things are things that you can only say in Chizezuru. So the children who lack this connection to an African heritage fail to then understand where they fit in to an African dialogue. So my advice is just give your children, sort of immerse them in an African story so that first they begin to identify as Africa, and whatever country they choose to go back to, it doesn't really matter, as long as they are doing their civic duty to build on the initiatives within Africa. Over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Watanai. Any questions or other contributions? We have a question here in the inbox. Let me just read it out. Language and names. Interesting, because I often wonder why I'm called Tambudzai, not as a person, but an incident or circumstance. I would love a name like Tendai, Tu, or Rudo, and not Namo. So is it interesting that if we look at the meaning of names, most names come from circumstances, chieftainship, and greatness, but I thought to respond to this one as it cites in my mind the idea of heritage and appreciation. That was a contribution from Tambu. Any more questions or contributions?
One of the things that I'd like to talk about is education. We need to interrogate our education system, especially now during the time of COVID, and especially now during a time when our children have been forced not to go to school because they've been based in the household. So I am very interested in, if we are going to progress as Africans, we have to change the narrative of an education system that was built for a certain decade. Our education system was built for industrialization, and then so it was built to create workers. If you then put on that the veneer of apartheid, colonialism, etc., it was built to develop native administrations so that the white people would have less Africans to speak to. And I speak to the context of Zimbabwe. It differs in different contexts. In Mozambique, it was a question of actually denying and denouncing your Africanism and actually, I'm trying to think of the word, but it's gone out of my head right now, where you would say, I no longer sit on the ground. You signed a document to actually say, I am no longer a native. I am now a person who identifies as Portuguese. And if you identify as that, you then get access to a better education. The same with the French. all of this is part of a system that was meant to create workers who fed into a capitalist system. So we need to interrogate our education, and we really need to start thinking about how do we get critical thinkers, because I find that the education that's being given to my children now in Zimbabwe or in South Africa, or where they have to regurgitate things and cram, that's ridiculous. You just have to Google it now. So why are we cramming? Why are we going back to a system where you write O levels of all your crammed material and you only begin to analyze things if you are able to get to A level, if you follow the British systems? So we really need to start to think about ways in which we deconstruct this education system that we inherited and have built upon, and really deconstructed to start our children thinking analytically at a very young age, being able to talk about things that we're talking about here at a young age, allowing young minds to be innovative. So I really, really feel that if Africa is to change, Africa has to change the way it educates its people. Over.
Thank you, Watanai, once again. Jonathan and Masunda, please just hold your contributions. Caroline has come onto the line, so I'd like to give Caroline a chance to share her presentation, and then we'll come back to you. Over to you, Caroline. Caroline, are you still there?
Which name is she using? Because I can't see Caroline right now.
It's Caroline. I think she's dropped out. She was here just a minute ago. Okay. Jonathan, over to you whilst we try to get hold of Caroline again.
I just want to weigh in on the question I think that Monya asked. I think the question was also about the diaspora. So one of the things that has been acknowledged by sociologists, in particular an African sociologist, Du Bois, is that there's also this idea of double consciousness. So where the African is a divided African about himself and what he or she must become. And as much as we are traumatized in this perspective, but the trauma is more pronounced in Africans who, or people of African origin who live in the West. So they identify with us when it suits them, but half the time they also identify with the West when it suits them. But also, unfortunately, they are forced to take these two sides, which is a challenge for them. And as Africa, we have not reached out to accommodate such challenges. So I remember that at one time when there were earthquakes in Haiti, the president of Senegal reached out and he said, we know that the people in Haiti are black and the world does not care. This is a country that is only 150 kilometers, I think, from the US. So, but the US can give aid as much as aid to Egypt, to Pakistan, and wherever they want to fight wars. But for Haiti, they have to pay for their sin of freedom. So you are saying that Haitians, Senegal is open, Africa is open. You can come back and we'll give you a place. So I think it was a way to reach out, but I think we need a systematic approach to reach out for spiritual cleansing and reawakening of our brothers who are lost in the West. At least they can make a choice, but having reunited with Mother Africa, not make an assumption that they love Africa, but there should be a process to accommodate these systems. We've seen that with the Jews, we've seen that with the Indians and the other people from other parts of the world. They make an effort to make sure that there are programs that unites people in the diaspora and their motherland. I think we have not done enough.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Masunda, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Kevin. I just wanted to make a contribution on the issue to do with names. I totally agree with the person who contributed. I agree with them, and I think it would be important to share just how names are given. Names used to be given on the premise of you're either named after someone or there was a story that actually accompanied the particular name that you got. So sometimes these stories, if you're named, if there was a story to the name that you were being given, if the stories aren't then shared with you, you might then have negative connotations that you attach to the particular name you have or the particular name that someone else has. So there's a need. Yes, we give particular names. Some of them might not be. An example of the name given was Namo. You might not know the reason behind having been given that particular name, but once that story is shared, I think most of our names are pregnant with meaning. So once those stories are shared, I think some of the negative connotations might actually come away. So yeah, that was just my contribution.
Thank you very much, Mazita. Jess?
Okay, thank you. There is a question. Jesse, how can translate books for Portuguese can help Mozambicans to be decolonized? Yeah, well, this is an interesting question. So, the colonial practice starts with education. Education is the key. And what's happened with our education, for instance, here in Mozambique? Our education is copy and paste of Portuguese educational system. All what we study here is about Portuguese culture, Portuguese thinkers, Portuguese literature, Portuguese philosophers. This is why we are experts in Portuguese studies, but we are not experts in Mozambican studies. And translating African books will open our view. Will no longer only be or sit and be watching to Portuguese as an example of evolution, as an example of education, as an example of thinking, and as an example of stories, but we'll look at Africa, we'll look at different corners of our perspective. So I think that translating books will open our perspective. Opening our perspective, we will be prepared to decolonize our mind, or it will be a decolonial process or decolonial practice. And then another question, I would like to know how we can be human rights activists, special women, without being influenced by European or American feminism theories. Yeah, this is an interesting question. There's Mozambican philosopher José Castiano. He introduced a concept. He was analyzing what all NGOs NGOs who are working on gender issues and feminism issues. All those NGOs, they, according to José Castiano, they criminalized our culture. They call premature marriage as things related to our culture. They call everything bad for our culture. Or when something bad happens, they call, okay, that's Mozambican culture, or that's our culture. So I think children are married not because it's our culture, or not because it's our culture sending children to the marriage, but children are marrying because they don't have a guidance. If you put opportunities in the rural village for all children, boys and girls, they will not marry. So we must stop linking our problems to cultural problems. We must stop criminalizing our culture, as José Castiano said.
Thank you very much, Jess. Any more questions or contributions? I don't know if Majita, you want to respond to that question or contribute. If anyone on the panel wants to respond to that, let me just read it out again. Jess read it out, but let me just read it out. The question is how one of the audiences would like to know how we can be human rights activists, especially women, without being influenced by Europeans or American feminism theories. Anyone on the panel want to respond to that? It was directed to Majita. Majita?
Thank you for the question. How I usually go about it is I found that it is very important to know your culture. It's very important to know your culture because once you know it, you know why certain things happen the way they do, and you can then either be for it or be against it. That is very important because when you then decide to take a stance on anything, it will be because you are making that you're taking that particular stance from an informed point of view, and you have to continuously check yourself in such a way that you remain true to yourself and you remain true to your culture, and you do not in essence become a sellout, so to speak. While I love my culture and I'm all for it, I also don't believe that it's stagnant. I believe that it's dynamic. So there are certain things, most of the things I love them, but there are certain things that I might be a bit, I might not be for. So those particular things are the ones that I would actually speak out against, or sometimes even I speak out for them. And also, I think one of the things that Watanai said was, it's also important not to be a feminist for the sake of being a feminist, using big jargon, sometimes that we don't even understand. It's important to use simple terms that you're able to articulate and that you're able to share with another person so that they're able to understand. So I think coming from the premise of knowing who you are, knowing your culture, knowing what you stand for and what you don't stand for is important. And also the need also to acknowledge that culture is not dynamic. There might even be need to modernize some aspects of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Majita, for that. Watanai? After Watanai, we have Janet Sibanda.
I think one of the things that we've got to be very careful of in terms of these terms that we throw around, like feminism and gender and things like that, is that they have taken on a different connotation for different people. So if I speak out against domestic violence as a divorced woman, I become a feminist. And yet, in my culture, in Zimbabwe, divorce is something that's not new. It's not something that was even in the time of my forefathers. Divorce was something that was a negotiated settlement between families. And it was understood that sometimes things just don't work out and there is a way in which things are dealt with. But because of the hat that's now been put on, oh, this is feminism, and a feminist is the strident female who speaks out against a certain issue, you then become labeled as feminist when it doesn't even apply to the specific context. We get these very, very toxic messages, especially on WhatsApp statuses, where women are portrayed as nagging, as volatile, as wanting just to be gold diggers and all of these things. And then you get the alternative where you get men being called unwilling to provide, and a lot of stereotypes are put into certain terms that we don't understand completely. So I am very careful and intentional about using labels and words that we are not defining correctly. So I would say that instead of saying, how can we be feminists, right, without being influenced by the question is, how we can be human rights activists? What stops you just saying this is about being human? If you are protecting somebody who is gay, it's not about their sexual orientation. It's about saying that they have the right to live a life as fully as any other person on this earth and should not be demonized. We don't need to then label it as I am being an ally to this, or I'm doing that. No, we're just talking about this is a right. It's a basic human right. Here is the law. It's in the 30 laws of human rights that the government signed. And this is what we're talking about. So let's stop with the labeling and let's be very intentional about, if we are going to use a label, let us explain the context in which we're going to use it, and let us understand the context in which it is going to be heard. Over.
Thank you very much for that, Watanai. Janet?
Thank you so much for that, Watanai. It's very profound, and it speaks a lot to people just catching on to trends and not fully comprehending in what it means. So my contribution is more to the issue of us knowing our culture. One of the speakers mentioned it, actually a lot of the speakers mentioned it before. And I realized that there's a huge void in the sense that a lot of our history was not written by us. I don't know if it's just me who's realized it, or maybe I haven't come across enough literature that speaks of our history being documented by Africans. But I find that a lot of the literature that I look for personally is not written by Africans. I'll give an example. I'm a mother, I have children. And when my children were having a birthday party, I decided that it would be nice to have a Shaka themed party, Shaka Zulu themed party. And all the information that I found out there had been written by white people. And the interesting thing is, once that information has been, or once that documentation has been done, it doesn't bear the authenticity or the truth that it would bear having been written by a local, by a native, you know? And I think that we need to start there. What is our culture? What is our heritage? What is it that we want to future generations to know about who Africa is? We need to go back. And the oral tradition is dying down because there's so much movement back and forth. Very few people are sitting down to be able to actually understand where we come from, what our history is. I, for one, don't know my family lineage, and right now you find that the younger generations are trying to put pieces together so we can understand who we are as a family from where I come from. So I even have friends who are out in the diaspora who grew up in Zimbabwe. I'm Zimbabwean, who grew up in Zimbabwe, and they're now raising their children out in America, the UK, and all kinds of places, but they don't have any books or anything that is bite-sized for their children to be able to learn the local languages. So they're now publishing, you know? So we need to actually take a step forward and start to write more, start to, and as was mentioned before, tell stories about our culture. And, you know, there's a series of short stories that was done about the American inventors and whatnot, history makers. You know, they've gone all the way. They talked about Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Edison, and everybody. They've gone to town about them. But have we actually taken the time to actually document our heroes and heroines? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Janet. We'll have Unati and then Tambu afterwards. I hope I said it correctly. Unati? Tech, please unmute. Unati, can you hear us?
She's unmuted, but it needs to, she needs to, or he, sorry, needs to speak through the mic.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. I hope everybody's well. I just wanted to comment on the Sister Princess's comments, the princess who spoke just before Sister Watanai. She mentioned something about culture being dynamic, which I think is a very, very, very important and critical observation. Also on the back of the fact that one of the brothers earlier on mentioned something about culture being like a software. I find that a very acute observation as well. It's clear that our history was not written by us, was not our oral traditions, our istakazelos, our praise name poetry, the whole identity process is not being kept as alive as it could and should. And in that way, I have this weird feeling and sense that when it comes to even being dynamic about our culture, which it needs to be, we may not go in the right direction because we don't know where we are stanced as we stand currently, because we just don't know where we come from. So there is a lot of misdirection because we are not even in the right position in the first place. And for us to talk about a dynamic culture, or to be able to update, I prefer to use the word to update our culture, we really need to take one or two steps backwards because of our specific historical, legacy. We just happen to be the most colonized people in the world. We just happen to be the most oppressed people in the world. So our position, our situation is a little bit more unique than other people. So we should stop this comparing ourselves with and so on and so forth. I think we're clear about that by now. However, I just wanted to highlight, yes, culture is dynamic, but how dynamic is it? What is it that we need to chop change? What is it that we need to update properly? How do we go about all of this? I think we just need to sit down on that one first before we launch off again and come up with a grandiose idea, and the next thing it falls flat on its face, the typical African story for not being well stanced in what we are at first. I know it's a bit boring, a bit difficult, but it's a very necessary vaccination. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. Next up, we have Tambu.
Thank you so much. This is quite an interesting conversation, and I just wanted to add my 5 cents to that in regards to when we begin to understand who we are as an African. And I think we're talking about, we're talking about trauma, and perhaps could we, and I hear a lot of let's go back, let's sort of step back, and whilst we want to go forward, if we're going back, I'm asking where are we going back to, and beginning to understand the history of each country in the African continent, for example, and then beginning to understand the languages and beginning to understand that as a people, we are just not necessarily slaves or anything else. Where do we find the history of anything else other than that before the colonialists, right? And then is there a place that we are talking to as we're having this conversation to say, this is where we can start, this is where we have it? Because I'm enjoying this conversation. However, I've also had a similar conversation to which I then also added to say, the idea of human rights, the idea of gender equality, the idea of feminism within the African context, when we talk about gender, in most African languages, gender does not exist, okay? So when we talk about gender equality, what does that mean in fact? And then we talked about we need to consider the fact that women have been oppressed. Therefore, when you talk about gender equality, we want to raise women before the men and so forth. So those are some of the sort of your buzzwords, your sort of trending things that we have learned since Beijing 95. And here we are. Those things continue to haunt us in our Africanness. And I want to share something that is very feministic-like, because I grew up in Zimbabwe before, you know, I'm part of the Township Girls. Sorry, it's not an ad, but I'm part of the Township Girls, the crossover generation. And the stories that we wrote were so powerful for us because we wanted to write a narrative that is relative to how we were raised, a narrative that we can own and be able to pass to the next generations. Now, let me go back to the reasoning around the feministic ideas. As I grew older, and I also went to Columbia University, I went to Holland to study, and I wanted to understand human rights because I had experienced some kind of human rights. I had understood the level of empowerment within my own family. My grandmother, who was a single parent because her husband died and she was a widow who was given land in Gokwe, somewhere there. And she tilted that land and provided for her children. And then she also knew how to preserve the food in times of drought or famine. She was able to have enough for the next season until when there was bountifuls of water and rain for that to continue. And how she built her hut was that in winter it would stay warm and in summer it would stay cool. And I was one of the children in the home who learned how to use ndove, you know, to put on the floors to keep it cool. And then how you use that, that's cow dung. You mix it and then it becomes some kind of a paste and you use it in your kitchens or in your rooms. And there's a way that you use it with other sort of condiments in the village that would allow for it to keep cool or keep warm. So this is something that I learned. And then in the 90s, we had begun to talk about the MDGs and so forth, and into the 2000s. And we had Millennium Villages, which looked like my grandmother's village, you know, my grandmother's hut. And these were being appropriated into communities in African villages, in African communities where development agencies were saying we are subscribing to these because rendezvous, as they are called, are so great for Africans because they can maintain heat and they can also be able to maintain coolness during summers. So, and if they're built in this way and that way, I think Africans will be able to have better housing or ways of living and not be impoverished and so forth. And I remember Sam Moyo at the time at a meeting, and I kept thinking, but my grandmother has been doing this over the last 40 years before now. Why has this been taken as a humanitarian and the best way possible? And they were called Millennium Villages. And I thought to myself, What happened to my grandmother's knowledge? Who is writing about it? So having thought about that, and the conversations that we began to have with Siswadzi here around township girls, it became imperative and quite important that if we don't write our stories, somebody is going to distort, misrepresent, and other us in who we are. And I'm thinking, as we have these conversations, what is the alternative to an education that Africans begin to learn in the way that when we were having oral education, some kind of knowledge sharing, some kind of imparting knowledge as people? The reasoning for me almost could be that was not written because it was meant to be for us. So the reason why the North invested 90% of its colonial time to live with us in an anthropological manner was to then be able to absorb these and be able to still kill and destroy at some point, because that's then exactly what happens, right? So how do we begin? If we are going to take this forward, what is the alternative? And where is that state that we begin to make an investment for an Africa we want? Because if we continue to say, I was misrepresented, it is not me, that's not my culture. So let the Zimbabweans write about the culture as diverse as it is. Let the Mozambicans write about their culture as diverse as it is. Let's use the languages as diverse as they are, so that we may begin to own and be accountable to what we continue to speak to in such a critical time of Africanhood, us ourselves being spoken and being identified in how we want to be. So we have our book on Amazon. You can find it, Township Girls, The Crossover Generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tambo, for that. I would like to, I'm going to play the voice note, Caroline's, what she was going to present, because she hasn't been able to connect. So just, well, we're running out of time. So after Caroline's contribution, we'll take 2 more responses or questions, and we'll then bring in Prof to close off the session.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Masunda. It's unfortunate I've had to make a recording of my presentation and I've not been able to join the discussion because of network challenges that I'm facing because of where I am. I'm going to make my presentation and it's going to concentrate on Africa without borders. Please excuse the noise because I had been moving up and down, trying to get connected. All right, so I'd like to thank the professor for this time to be able to make my presentation and also for being part of this great initiative, this great discussion with intelligent minds. All right, so I'm going to start my presentation now. So pre-colonialism era, it was mostly about kingdoms, states, empires, kings, chiefs, you name it. It was this kingdom, trading with that kingdom. It was mostly, and if you're going to look back, we'll get to see that there was booming manufacturing, there was trade, e.g. tobacco, gold, copper, spices, animal skins, ivory. That was within the kingdoms. There was the trade of agricultural products. There was long distance, neighboring state trade, and even the local people within themselves, they also traded. And different scholars from history have highlighted that it was actually a booming period. And then came colonization, which led to our current state, where we are now, where we see it's mostly the export of raw materials and the importation of the more expensive finished in complete products. And these same products are from the raw materials that would have been imported from Africa, like the ivories, the golds, the agricultural produce that is being exported from Africa in its raw state, and then coming back in complete products, you know. And to some extent, we can actually still say that there is still a scramble for Africa, because you get to see agreements like the Europe and Africa trade agreements. There is the Asia and Africa trade agreements. You know, it's still the same people, but they have changed in terms of their naming of what they are scrambling for the African products. Because you do notice that we are rich. Africa is rich when it comes to our minerals. We are rich when it comes to farming. We are rich when it comes even to our wildlife. And the really puzzling thing is that then there is a lack of civilization narrative that is then spread across the nations now. And I believe all these conflicts that are happening in Africa, for example, the tribal conflicts, the ethnic wars, the ravaging widespread poverty, part of it was influenced from colonialism. And the unfortunate challenge now is that our African leaders, they've been unable to foster unity and oneness within the continent. So this has also seen the rise now in devastating terror acts that are happening within Africa, when you get to see nationalities of a certain country fighting nationalities from the next country, because maybe they're saying they're stealing jobs from us, things like that. So you get to also see that the current crop of leadership that is really not keen on tackling issues to do with Africa without borders. Because with Africa without borders, we get to realize and agree as Africa that we have the same soul. We are from the same soil, so we are one people. So there is no need for us then to be fighting against each other. There's no need for the tribal wars. There's no need for the ethnic wars that we witness each and every single day. So my conclusion is that Africa needs leaders that are really concerned about Africa, that can be able to stand and defend the African legacy. And then we don't necessarily need to reconstruct lines, but we need to have the courage, the vision, and the qualities that were destroyed by the conferences. For example, the Berlin Conference, where we ended up having Africa demarcated into different countries and named differently. And I would also like to mention the issue of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is coming to effect now, which deals with Africans being able to trade more with the neighbor, you know, as compared to going to look for trade partners outside there, like what I've mentioned before about the other alliances, the trade agreements that are happening with other countries or with other continents out there. Africa gets to trade within Africa. We also get to benefit from each other's resources as a nation, as one people. If we to foster the issue of Africa without foster the issue of Africa without borders, the issue of oneness and unity as Africa, without having to look at each other as this one from this country and this one from that country. We'll be able to have good cultural exchanges, we'll be able to learn from each other. And even the younger generations that are coming after us will be able to inherit all that richness. You know, Africa is rich in resources, like what I mentioned before. It's rich in culture. It's rich in land. We have so much land that we can use it's rich in arts, you know. So that's the conclusion of my presentation for now. Thank you.
That was Caroline's presentation. Because of time, we'll take 2 responses or contributions, and then we'll hand over the floor to Prof to close off the session. So please use your hand reaction button if you want to contribute or add or respond to Caroline. Seems there are no contributions or questions. So I'd like to hand over the mic to Prof to close off the session. Over to you, Prof.
Wow. Thanks, Kevin. You know, I am not going to say much because this session has come to an end. And I think the panelists have said much more profound things than I could ever say at the end of it. So maybe I just thank each and every one of the panelists and those who attended. Thanks so much, Jesse, for doing it. I mean, you've started a publishing company that's doing it, not waiting. To so-called, you called it, to get out of this suffocation, which allows us to breathe our traditions, our creations, our wisdom to shine through. So congratulations, and thanks so much for coming on the panel. And Watanai, thanks for a fantastic articulation of really important issues. And also speaking as a man, father, African man, I really find it very, very refreshing. Your idea of the 2 ideas that I just found brilliant. One, that African women do have their own understanding of power relations in all relationships. And in fact, they have always used that power to be able to shape our families. I mean, there was no family without a woman. And I know even in my own ethnic group, the mother was closer to God than the father even. So great. The second thing I found brilliant in your talk was this thing about, in the Western civilization, the idea that self-actualization is the top end of, and this Maslow's law. What you explained is that for Africans, it's the other way around. You are born with self-actualization. You don't have to be married. You don't have to have your own child. You don't have to have any cattle on the farm. You are going to play all the roles. It doesn't matter, you're the president of the country, you're going to be somebody's son for the rest of your life. There's going to be a young girl who's going to be your mother, and you have to treat her like a mother. Fantastic. Then Masita, I really found Masita's talk, it's just incredible. It was so enlightening. I learned so much just listening to a fresh approach to articulating these issues. And coming from a young woman, it's also great because it reinforces what Watanai spoke about in terms of not just self-actualization, but women, African women, redefining what all these big jargon terms mean, gender, mainstreaming, etc., etc. And then Masita said, really, if we are able to do that, that discovery is then possible. We can only have a dignified, proud existence. When that happens, then it becomes easier to have one voice and one direction. I really found that talk fantastic. And just reinforcing the idea that we kept talking about during this series, and that is the African Union is a most important institution for us. It's young, a lot ahead of our recent history, but for sure, if we don't have that software right, if we don't have, like you kind of agreed with what I'd said in one of the sessions, that aspiration number 5, the need to really have an Africa driven by its own identity and its own social software. Fantastic. Jonathan, thanks so much for your talk. And you focused on the institutions as the rules of the game, and how how culture is central to development. That message can never be overemphasized. You said, if you don't have anything, everything you use, you borrow from elsewhere, then you are nobody. That's what you said, something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. But but you also said we've come a long way. We've come a long way. And by rediscovering ourselves now and asserting ourselves, we are rediscovering our own idea of being a loving continent and loving people. Our systems, our institutions, from family to community, have been built around love and trust, and so on, and responsibility. That was great. Yeah, but one of your parting comments was, then we need a line of sight for our rediscovery and our transforming our institutions and who we are, our civilization, so that it's only us who can go back to reconnect with our past, use that to firm ourselves up in the present, and take ourselves to the future. Yeah, so no one knows us better than ourselves. Then Wirina and I spoke almost like for the younger generation. We're looking for this kind of conversation to spark this patriotism, this sense, a strong sense of belonging that was damaged by colonization. But you did point out something that's generally agreed also on the continent, that colonization was a big project. And it cannot be diluted by ideas which are smaller than the ideas which originally constructed it. And that, it goes back to rediscovering that rich civilization that created Africa before, that crafted Africa as a great people before. But yeah, united we stand, those are going to be for each other. So that was great. And then almost before we finally got Caroline in, there was lots of good conversation around, and also a lot of good stuff in the chat room, the chat box rather. There was talk about culture as a social software for our progress. And when was it commented on education, said, I mean, why have an education system where people have to cram everything and regurgitate it when we have Google? We need to create an educational system which develops analytical minds right from the beginning. You don't have to cram anything, because education is contextual. So you can always look for the specifics as and when they are needed. But if we don't use the educational system to rewrite and write our own story, I think it was Tambuma's making that point. Someone is going to write it for us, and they're not going to. They're going to distort it. So we better do it for ourselves. So when Caroline eventually came on, I'm delighted Caroline, you eventually managed to get on, because you had a fantastic contribution to fight, final contribution. You spoke so well about, well, just, I think you called it in Africa without borders. After all, you're born on this continent. Everyone African is born on the continent, or of people who were born on the continent. We're born out of the same soil and vegetation. So all the other differences are minor to our similarities. All in all, ladies and gentlemen, I really think that let's temporarily put this conversation now on hold as we go to other conversations, but we will be back as Kevin and the MRS team will explain with other themes. So thank you very much for participating. I hand back to Kevin.
Thank you very much, Prof. This brings our thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much for everyone who was in attendance and joining us in the course of this whole series. Thank you to our panel for taking time to share your presentations and share the knowledge with us today. This brings a close to our series. For anyone who would like to share the content, it will be available on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. So you can go to the channel Dialogue with Prof. Mandiru Kuni, and you'll be able to share the content there. Thank you very much to the DWP technical team for putting the session together and putting the series together. Big shout out to you. Our next session, our next series will be focusing on education. So please do look out for that. And we will catch each other next week where we will start unpacking education on the African continent, and we'll dig deeper into that. Thank you very much, guys, and have a great evening and a great weekend.